this talk for 30 minutes is going to probably place a kind of an ominous cloud over you. I'm going to be very respectful. I'm not here to shock you. But I do need you to know what I was taught and what I taught the kids. But I want you to hold on to something that towards the end of this, though, I'm going to have a message of hope, because there is a very powerful message of hope, and it lies in you, the parent, the guardian, the step-parent, whoever's over the child. But I want to begin with talking about why I even started in this field, because I think it's really important to understand the comprehensive sex educator, because I'm also hoping, very similar to my good friend Abby Johnson, that I'm going to get some comprehensive sex educators out of comprehensive sex education and teaching our children, or allowing parents truly to teach our children, okay? So, but I started this because, so I was a comprehensive sex educator for 10 years, and why did I start this? I started this because I truly wanted to help people. I think nowadays young people call it being woke. Well, I thought I was being woke at the time because I was working with populations of people who were at high risk for contracting HIV. These were people that nobody wanted to reach out to. And I felt really proud that I was doing my part to help protect them. And so my first job was at a gay organization, and I was an HIV prevention educator working with men who have sex with men and women of color of childbearing age. That's how we called it. After that, I became an HIV program coordinator or director, program manager, where I managed the teams and I trained them how to go out into the community and speak to people. While I was doing that, the Center for Health Training, which is now called Cardia Services, began to mentor me and prepare me as a consultant to train all over Texas and New Mexico and various states. And in 2000, and I ended my career as a Title X training manager over all of Texas and New Mexico. And so I was truly mentored, not only by the gay organization that I worked for, but then by Planned Parenthood and Cardia Services. We'll do it this way. Let me tell you a little bit about the training. So you've heard a lot about these curriculums. And in all honesty, as I review these curriculums, they're all pretty much the same. When I started, it really wasn't a curriculum that we had. We're just talking about prevention and risk reduction, and that's what this is. There's a difference between risk reduction and risk avoidance. You're really familiar with risk avoidance. Risk avoidance is eliminating all the risk. Don't do drugs, smoking cessation. But that health model, which is a primary health model, has never been applied to sex education. And so comprehensive sex education is risk reduction, which means you can do anything and everything that you want without judgment. Just use a condom, use lubrication, get tested, get treated. And if you conceive a child, we'll refer to you to an abortion. It is really that simple. And so when I started as an HIV educator, they said, you need to learn how to talk to teens as well. So they had me walk across the street, literally, to the Planned Parenthood clinic, where the head of education of Greater Austin for Planned Parenthood taught me how to reach out to teens. And the first thing that she did was tell me about all the horror stories of these young girls coming into the clinic. And I'm not going to repeat those horror stories, but I was horrified. I was in my early 20s. She told me it was stories about objects, story about injuries, all kinds of things, as young as 10 years old getting abortions without their parents involved. And I, just like your faces are, I was shocked. And I said, oh my goodness, you've convinced me. Teach me how to tell these girls not to have sex. And she said, she patted me on the knee. She said, no, dear. We're not going to tell them not to have sex. We're just going to teach them how to do it safer. You see, we meet them where they're at, the choice that they have made, and we're just going to teach them how to do it safer. I said, yeah, but you just told me about these horror stories. I mean, objects, injuries, come on. She said, no, we can't judge them. This is a choice that they've made. It's their right. Does that sound familiar? It's their sexual right. So we're just going to teach them how to do it safer. Meet them where they're at and teach them how to do it safer. Well, Although my first reaction was to say, no, we want to teach them not to have sex, but this was the expert. This was the director of sex health education of Planned Parenthood, a very large organization that was getting government funding. The organization I was working for, they got government funding. To me, it was like a stamp of approval. If they're getting government funding and the government is saying that this is okay, then they must know better than me. So I allowed them to teach me, and I started reaching out to teenagers. One of the first things that we're taught in comprehensive sex education, it's kind of like this sexual reprogramming. You have to learn how to talk about sex, and in all ways, and it's very graphic, without really reacting to it. It's almost like becoming desensitized. And so in order to do that, we also have to reach the teen that way. And so what I was taught is, listen, the teens are going to be a little nervous. They're going to be a little shy, and we need to help them get comfortable with this information so that we can provide them with the prevention information that's going to keep them safe, they said. So one of the first things that we do is an icebreaker. How many of y'all have done an icebreaker at work or at church or somewhere? Yeah, icebreakers, they're fun, right? They help you bond with each other. They kind of loosen you up. You're giggling. Okay, good. Well, guess what? One of the first things that we did was an icebreaker for the kids to get them comfortable. And so what you see up here is just a positive example of what the icebreaker looked like, except it was different. What we did is, because we're going to talk about sex, how about we start off with you telling me all of the slang words that you know for body parts. Women's body parts, guys' body parts, all the slang terms that you can think of that refer to sex. Now, at first, of course, they're young, they're nervous, and, they don't really want to say those things. They say a little bit, then they giggle. And then, of course, there's some kids that are bold enough to say some pretty crude things. We might even, one of the exercises could even be like, instead of calling it out and me writing it on the board, here's some markers. You guys do it and put it on the board. And after a while, when they see that the adult isn't judging them or getting angry with them, they get comfortable with it. And they're starting to get comfortable with this kind of information in a very crude way. And so then they're prepared for the rest of the information that we're going to share. Here's the big difference, though. When we have an icebreaker as adults and we look at this, for example, this one, it's very empowering. When we see a word collage like this, we're thinking, yeah, I want to be enabled, I want to educate, I want responsibility, leadership, engaging, and it really pumps you up. Imagine instead that was just a collage of crude and graphic terms about humanity, about our bodies, and about sex. How does that redefine sexuality in your child's life? What it does is it dehumanizes them. And sex education and dehumanizing in sex education not only grooms the child for sex, but it grooms them for the dehumanizing act of abortion. Because if we can dehumanize them at this age and this kind of activity, then the next step is then to dehumanize the unborn child. I want to point out, though, that according to the FBI, child molesters use pornography to groom children into sexual relationships. They demonstrate sex acts to children. They lower the sexual inhibitions of children. They desensitize the children to sex, and they sexually arouse the children. Planned Parenthood uses sex education to groom children for sex and creates demand for abortion. They demonstrate sex acts to children. They lower the sexual inhibitions of children. They desensitize children to sex, and they sexually arouse children. Because it is a natural bodily function, especially when going through puberty, that when you are shown sexually explicit things or in conversation, our body just has an automatic response. It's not because we want it to, it just happens. and it starts to desensitize our children. And it creates this whole business model for a clinic like Planned Parenthood, where they have a customer for life. So much of the education is to go into an audience like this, regardless of age, and the instructions to a comprehensive sex educator is to think, everyone in here has done anything and everything when it comes to sex. And it is my job as a prevention educator to ensure that you know how to protect yourself from STIs, HIV, and an unplanned pregnancy. So if it means that I'm going to have to talk about all those sexual acts so that you understand how to protect yourself, that's what I'm going to do, and that's what these curriculums do. So I'm going to talk about oral sex, I'm going to talk about vaginal sex, and yes, I'm going to talk about anal sex. I'm going to talk about any activity that has to do with bodily fluids that carry any of those sexually transmitted infections. So I'm going to talk about semen and vaginal secretions and blood. Yes, it's going to be that graphic. And because I was taught from the very beginning that I'm not to judge, I'm going to give all this information, and it's to help the people in front of me. And so we begin to introduce children to different sexual acts. One of the things that I was taught at Planned Parenthood, and this was in the 90s, and I was in a predominantly African American and Hispanic community. And they actually told me that many young Hispanic girls will be involved in anal sex to protect their virginity or to avoid pregnancy. And so that was the rationale for me to talk about anal sex and to normalize anal sex in the classroom. So all sexual activities need to be spoken of so that the audience can understand how those infections are being transmitted. So everything really is being exposed to the child. And the only thing that comprehensive sex education can do to protect from these STIs or an unplanned pregnancy is contraception, the use of condoms, the use of lubrication, testing often, because they know that if you're sexually active, at some point you will get an infection. They know that at some point you will get pregnant because it's not 100% effective. Abstinence is the only way. But then here lies the other problem. Many people, according to these educators, don't want to use condoms. So this is where, how many of y'all have heard about the role-playing in curriculums? Has anyone heard about role-playing? Role-playing is very instrumental in these curriculums. Because in order to convince someone to use condoms 100% of the time, every time, then we have to negotiate condom skills. We have to negotiate the use of condoms. So we're going to talk about these role plays. Imagine that you're at a party and you're a little bit drunk and you want to have sex, but your partner says that they don't want to use a condom. How do you negotiate that? And then that role play, you know what the point is? You eroticize it. You eroticize the use of condoms. You tell them how it's going to feel good. You offer to put it on yourself. And these conversations are happening in the classroom with your children. Talking about eroticizing the use of condoms and all of this has a lot to do with the social change that's really a part of this education. It is restructuring the way our youth think about relationships and marriage and sex. And it's not about bonding anymore. Now, we talk a lot about the use of the condoms, but I want you to look at this condom risk reduction graphic that I got from the Medill Institute of Sexual Health. If you were to go to the CDC, or if you were to listen to Planned Parenthood, or any of these curriculums, they're going to use words like, the CDC recently, I looked at some of their information about condoms, and they say they're greatly effective. They don't really share the numbers. The numbers are there. You just have to dig in and find out where they are and decipher the research. But I remember there's this one PDF that CDC has, and they kept talking about how they're greatly effective when used correctly. They're greatly effective. They're greatly effective. And after a while, I was like, well, if the CDC says that they're greatly effective, and if Planned Parenthood says they're greatly effective, then they must be greatly effective. Well, what the Medical Institute for Sexual Health did was that they actually took the data and the numbers, and they put it in a graphic so that you could see how greatly effective condoms actually are. So what you see here is this chart shows the risk reduction in contracting an STI when using a condom correctly and consistently 100% of the time. How many of you in here do anything correctly and consistently 100% of the time? Yeah, me neither. I can't even get my presentation up here correctly. But apparently, we expect our youth to be able to do it. Okay, so no one's going to be able to do that. So even if it's done correctly and consistently 100% of the time, condoms reduce the risk of getting HIV by 85%. Per use, just that one time. 50% for chlamydia. It reduces the risk of contracting chlamydia by 50%. That doesn't sound like greatly to me. 50% for gonorrhea, 50% for syphilis, 30% for herpes, because herpes is transmitted by skin-to-skin contact. So condom doesn't really help much with that. And HPV up to 70%. And that's with consistent and perfect use 100% of the time. And then there's a note there that says condoms are less effective when used for anal intercourse. And today what we're seeing is the push of anal intercourse through social media, through Teen Vogue, through 17 magazine, and in the classroom. Don and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, and apparently in California, he had heard from a physician or a nurse practitioner, I'm not sure, at one of the Kaiser clinics saying that there was an increase in anal injuries among young girls in their clinics because this is being pushed on the girls. With those facts, it's no wonder, this is a graphic from the CDC, I didn't create this, that youth bear disproportionate share of STIs. So as you see that Americans ages 15 to 24 make up just 27% of the sexually active population, but account for 50% of the new STIs each year. That's all the STIs, including HIV. Why is this being ignored? How can the CDC or any health educators say that condoms are greatly effective? This is another graphic created by Ascend, and there's a source on there. It's from the Teen Speak Out survey, where they say that that teens say that federally funded sex education or comprehensive sex education makes them feel pressured to have sex. They feel more pressure from the education than they do their own peers. Our children shouldn't be pressured into having sex. Just because we go through puberty and we become curious and we start to have some desires doesn't mean that we're like animals and that we need to just all of a sudden become sexually active. But that's how they're treated. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what the youth say. So when I was an HIV prevention educator, I was invited to go into an alternative school in Austin, Texas, and it was in the east side, and it was an area that was very high risk for STIs and drug use and violence. And these kids in this alternative school had been kicked out of every school. This was their last chance. They just needed to stay at this school and not get kicked out again. There were 13, 14-year-old girls and boys in my classroom. And as an HIV educator, I walk in, and the first thing that I do is I write oral, anal, vaginal on this side of the board, and blood, semen, and vaginal secretions on this side of the board. And we're going to talk about sex and how it's transmitted through those bodily fluids. And one of the girls raises her hand, and I'm going to clean up the language because I don't want to be disrespectful, but I want you to understand what she's saying. And the question is not as important as the response that I gave her and how they responded. She said, "When I give boys oral sex, I gag. Teach me how to do it better." I reacted the same way. I don't care that I was trained to do this education. I reacted the same way. My heart fell. I took a breath, and I decided to use my counseling skills and listening skills and client-centered care skills. And I said, okay, what I hear you saying is that when you are involved in this act, you react a certain way, and you don't like it. She said, that's right, I don't like it, but if you teach me how to do it better, maybe I will. A comprehensive sex educator, one of the first things that they're going to be thinking about is, has she been using condoms? Is she coming in contact with bodily fluids? What is her risk? And perhaps they would even give her some tips on how to avoid risk. This is what I said. I said, well, first of all, since you say you don't like it, have you considered not doing the thing you don't like? And she didn't say anything. All those kids turned around and looked at me, and they weren't judged the way Planned Parenthood said that they would feel. They didn't look at me with anger or judgment or even shame. For the first time in that classroom, those kids looked innocent again, doe-eyed as they stared at me. And I took that opportunity and I said, guys, do you realize you don't have to do any of this that's written on the board? You don't have to have anal or oral or vaginal sex. You don't ever have to come in contact with these bodily fluids. Do you know that? And the same girl raised her hand. She said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that. Parents, if we don't talk to our children first, someone else is waiting to do it. And in your state, unfortunately, they're very aggressive about it. When I hear a 13-year-old girl tell me that nobody, including her family, has ever told her that she doesn't have to have sex, that's a problem. And that's also a problem with this kind of education. Next thing I know, these kids, boys and girls, I was really surprised by the boys. I really expected the boys to be like, whatever. No. Next thing I know, they're talking about, hey guys, you know, the community center has free movies that we can just grab and watch at the community center. We could do that instead of having sex. They started coming up with ideas. I didn't even facilitate that discussion. They were talking about it. They started talking to each other about different ways they could avoid having sex, that they could just hang out and be friends. And then a young girl pulled away from the group. She came up to me like this and she said, but wait a minute, I already had sex. Everyone expects me to do it. I won't be able to say no now, right? I said, yeah, you can. You can say no. You can say no. You can decide never to do it again, or you can decide to wait until you're married. You have that right. And she smiled and ran back to the group to participate with the rest of the group, the rest of her friends. I'm telling you this because we all know, I bet you every parent here knows, that when we set boundaries on our children, they may roll their eyes at us. They may get angry, but they like it, don't they? They like it when we set boundaries, healthy boundaries with our children. They love it. Believe me, they are going to embrace the eye roll. Okay, have this conversation with your children. Embrace the eye roll. See it as a good thing. I just did a good thing because I got an eye roll from my kid. It's a good thing, right? It is. It is. My son, now I raised my son very differently. I taught this information, and I am going to admit I lived that life until God got a hold of me. And you know when God got a hold of me? When I had my own unplanned pregnancy, I scheduled an abortion, and I almost aborted my own son. Now, the story of how I didn't abort my son is a whole other lecture. You can invite me again to your state, and I'll tell you all about it. But I decided to cancel that appointment and have my son. And at the age of 1, God called me to him and made me his, and I never left the church ever since. But it was, thank you. It was a process. It was a long process because he had many years of reprogramming to do. But I knew that I didn't want to raise my son that way. And so I used those communication skills, everything that I knew to teach him and protect him in the way that I knew was best. And so when I got to the point that I started speaking out against this sex education, I asked my son, he was 17, I said, Ibri, how can I create a curriculum? What do you think kids want? What would kids want in the home? And he said, Mom, the eye roll came. He's like, please do not write a curriculum. Please don't make a video and another workbook. Kids don't want that. I'm like, well, what do kids want? Parents have to talk to their kids about this. He said, do it the way you did it with me. I said, well, how did I do it with you? And it may sound a little cheesy. He was 17. He's not a cheesy kid. But he said, Mom, you spoke to me from your heart. You told me what you expected of me, what you wanted for me, what your vision was for me, for my future. And kids want that. There was a time that he got embarrassed because he was invited to go to a concert. And I called the parents, and I wanted to know everything about this concert. I was all in there, just making sure it was safe. And Ibri said, he told his friend, I'm so embarrassed that she did that. And his friend actually didn't have his mother in his life. And he said, Ibri, I wish I had a mom that did that for me. And he was proud that I was an involved parent. I want you to be an involved parent. And it means that you need to prepare yourself with this information. You have to, well, I'm going to say this. You are so powerful that this is what Planned Parenthood taught me. In the 10 years that I worked in comprehensive sex education, at every workshop that I conducted, at every training, and at every conference, this is what they always said. Parents are a barrier to service. They know how powerful you are. If you don't have power over your child's life, it's because, I'm sorry, if I'm going to make you mad, maybe I'm not. It's because you're not actually participating in your child's life. They know that you are the most powerful influencer in their lives. They're going to roll their eyes. They're not going to like it, but they are listening, and they're going to listen to you. They really will. Now, parents are a barrier to service. As soon as a parent knows that their child is at a Planned Parenthood knows that they won't see that child again. Because we have a natural instinct to protect our children, and we're going to find every way to not let them go back to that clinic. But Planned Parenthood will find every way to ensure that you don't find out, whether it's getting an anonymous name or a phone number of a friend, or taking them out of school and going to their clinic and then bringing them back to school so that you don't know about it. And when you read anything about the curriculum and the makers of this curriculum, like the Future of Sex Education, write that down, go to their website. It's not a good website. Their goal is to have comprehensive sex education all over this world. And one of the things that they mention in there is that they want it K through 12 because they know that if they can start this at a very young age, then they have completely changed our child, their heart, their mind, and our society. But you do have the advantage. You are the sole authority over your child. You teach them your morals. You teach them your values. Do not believe the myths that they have the right and they're going to do it anyway, because it's not true. And if you're like me, and if you have a past that you didn't do it the right way, don't fall for that lie that says, I'm a hypocrite if I teach my child to do it differently than I did it. No. My mistakes in my past served me well to raise my son the right way. So I don't want any parent here to feel that, well, I have a shady past myself. No, you know different now, and that's what parents want. We want better for our children. That's right. Because it doesn't take Planned Parenthood. It doesn't take a government. It doesn't take these comprehensive sex educators. What it takes is a family. And it's important that you have that eye-to-eye contact with your child, that you have those communication skills, that you prepare yourself ahead of time for the questions that they may have, because this is a lifelong conversation. I'm not interested in teaching your children about risk avoidance and abstinence. I'm interested in teaching you. because I will not be there next week. I will not be there in a year or in 5 years or in 10 years, but you will. And they need to have that confidence that they can speak to you about these things. Deuteronomy 6:7, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk to them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. We need to take God's word, and we need to take action with it. Because this scripture has been twisted and used by the other side. Because they know that if they can teach this to your kids in every class, and in sex education, and through social media, then they're going to change your kids. We need to take that lead in our children's lives. Why did I finally leave? I left because when I was in teaching Planned Parenthood of South Texas at a conference, Title X had a new key issue, and it was human trafficking. I don't know if y'all know this, but statutory rape, having sex with a young person, is also considered a case of human trafficking. And that year, it was my job to train Planned Parenthood and all the Title X clinics that human trafficking was a problem, and I needed to teach them how to identify victims of human trafficking so they could report it and protect these young girls, mostly girls. It happens to boys as well, but it's mostly girls. And I knew that in my 10 years with Planned Parenthood, it was very common knowledge that there were lots of girls who would come in who were having sex with adult men. And we knew that that was happening. They knew it was happening. But if they liked using the don't ask, don't tell version. If I don't ask how old her partner is, I don't have to tell. So I said, you know that this is happening, and I want you to know it's human trafficking, statutory rape and human trafficking, and it needs to be reported. And they continued to dismiss me. I said, maybe you don't understand that a victim will protect their captor. So maybe you're thinking that they are actually in a healthy relationship, but they're not. They're afraid. So you need to report this. You need to find a way to report it and save this young girl. They continued to dismiss me and kind of even blow it off. I said, I don't understand your reaction. Why are you blowing this off? Why are you not taking this seriously? And an older nurse raised her hand. She said, honey, if she's not with this man this month, she'll be with another one next month. And they all nodded in agreement. Their view of your children is skewed, and they do not have their best interest in mind. When I came back to Austin and told my supervisor that they refused to report victims of human trafficking, she set me straight and said, if I wasn't pro-choice and if I wasn't pro-comprehensive sex education, I didn't belong there. And she was right. I didn't belong there. And I left in 2009. And this is why I created It Takes a Family. Because I want to encourage you to reclaim parenthood. I want you to stop believing that everything in the world has a more powerful influence over your children than you do, because it's not true. You have a unique position of being one of the most powerful and influential people in your children's lives, and I want you to take a hold of that. Feel free to contact me on monicacline.com, email me, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you. But I want you to know that this battle is real, both in this world here physically and legislator, but also spiritually. And it's time to take action. We cannot be passive on this, not only in what we're doing out in the community, but we cannot be passive in our own homes. We need to engage with our children. I encourage you to do it because they will love you for it.